Welcome to the Public Safety Committee. It's Friday, September 30th, 2011. I'm Councilmember Mitchell Englander, the chair of the committee. I am joined by none of my colleagues, which is great. So we're going to slam through this agenda and get to the critical hearts of the matter. And we're going to start first with the consent agenda, which we can adopt if we get some other colleagues here as well. So it'll be consent from the chair on items 2, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. We'll hold item 1, 8, 3 and 4, 5, and 7 on the desk. We've got one speaker card filled out for 8, and we will adopt the CAO report for item 5. Actually, we're going to get back to that because that didn't go, that went on consent for Iwasi reprogramming, so we'll adopt the CAO report on that, and we'll take public comment first. And the speaker card we have is Vincent Negelia. If you can come on up.
Good morning. So thanks for the come from the
Neglia. And a Valley native. So if you can speak into the mic as well, so those who are playing the home game can hear as well.
I am a city employee, however, I'm not here representing the department. I'm here representing myself as a citizen of CD2. I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the department on this. It's my own opinion. What I wanted to discuss is the possibility of the committee looking at asking the CAO and the LA Police Protective League looking at the possibility of expanding the amount of time that an individual can stay in the DROP program. The DROP program is that delayed retirement option plan where basically, like in my case, work retired on paper 25 years but give the city 30 years of service. I have a 25-year retirement base. The city gets the benefit of having a 30-year guy with a 25-year pension base. The guy gets the benefit by having the retirement pension check thrown into an account that gains interest, and then at the end of the 5-year drop, the individual can withdraw that account. So that's the benefit to the employee. There's a lot of shock jock radio talk that kind of vilifies the program because it looks as if the city is giving that individual retiring employee $250,000 or $300,000, when in fact that money that the retiree is taking is their own money out of the retirement account that's been put in from their own bank account. So that aspect of the program never seems to make it to the shock jock. But what I was going to ask is for this committee to consider the idea of expanding the amount of time an individual can stay in DROP. And there's 4 specific individual reasons that I think lend some credibility to that idea. I'll talk about 2 of them, or as many as you want to give me time to discuss. But sort of the Reader's Digest version is one of the ideas goes to the idea of litigation. Basically, you have the experienced individuals retiring out and creating a vacancy in...
I'm going to keep going.
Thank you. Give them the... create a vacancy in their job that they were performing while on the department. That causes us to take somebody at lesser rank and cause them to do the job of the senior person. I'm a detective supervisor. In my unit, I have 2 D2s that have been doing the job of a D3 for almost 3 years. I have 3 D1s that are doing the job of a D2 for somewhere between 1 and 2.5 years. We keep creating that situation by the experienced people retiring out. Well, we have a policy, we have a provision in the MOU that causes an individual to be able to get paid for working at an advanced rank for a certain amount of days and getting paid for it. Well, of course, we've been doing this for years. We've far exceeded the amount of days that an individual could work out of class. And every time we take a tenured individual out of the recipe, we cause a lower ranking individual to do their job. We're creating the scenario for somebody to say, I want my money, I'm going to sue. So we keep creating that possible scenario the more we let the tenured guys retire. Another possibility for the city to consider is that as somebody works for the police department, they recruit overtime. In the 80s, right around the time of the Olympics, we had vast amount of overtimes that never got paid for. So an individual leaves the city, they're going to have to get cashed out for all of those hours that are owed them. Well, we have an inordinate amount of people that are going to retire out in this fiscal year because they got into the drop at the end of the first drop contract that ended in 2007. So 5 years from there is coming around in this fiscal year, and an inordinately large amount of people are going to retire this year, and are all going to cash out at the same time.
Let me ask you this. Do you have any written plan that you can submit for the record? And then we can look at, I mean, it sounds very interesting, although we can't really have a dialogue as public comment. But if you can submit that, and we can look into feasibilities, look into cost. That's really what it boils down to, is the dollars. And so it certainly sounds like it's got some merit to look into. And
I had given my 10-minute rendition to Mr. Krikorian's office, who is my city councilman. I'd be happy to come to the other offices, though, and do the same thing with your deputies.
That'd be great. Thank you very much. I am now joined by my colleague, the Honorable Councilman Dennis P. Good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
All right. The next item we'll take up is item 1.
Item 1, CLA and city attorney reports and ordinance relative to prohibiting the sale and use of home products which contain certain synthetic drugs or their chemical derivatives.
What do you want? Morning.
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 So how are we doing on this? We've got a new city attorney report on this now.
We do.
If you can walk us
A
through
revised
that.
one.
You can be brief, but I think the essence of this, what we were looking for in the last committee meeting, was to ban the ingredients from any product sold in the city of Los Angeles that had these ingredients. That was the critical thing that we were looking for, I believe. And so I wanted to make sure we captured that. Yeah.
Right, and so at the last committee meeting, you guys presented 4 questions for us to report back on. So I've kind of broken them up. The first question, as you just said, was the products question. And we're very fortunate to have Dr. Cyrus Rangan here from the County Department of Public Health. And he's going to explain in a little bit more detail about what the synthetic substances in bath salts are. And if I
could direct it to, I understand that it's not, and I just want it for the record, that the city of Los Angeles in this ordinance is not, and it says here, that it's not trying to ban bath salts. It's trying to ban the ingredients in any products that contain, and you can help us with the pronunciation so everybody gets it on the record, but it's MDPV. And that's the critical thing in this, that they're using it for plant food, they're using it for other products possibly as well, and that there are no products that should be sold at all with those ingredients. Is that?
That's correct. And just to clarify, it's not that it is being used as plant food or used as bath salts. These are just names that are being used on the street to describe the substance.
Got it. Okay. So, yeah, walk us through that, if you will, and thanks for coming. And if you could state your name for the record as well.
Yes, sure. My name is Cyrus Rangan. I'm a physician and medical toxicologist with the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, and I work for a bureau called the Bureau of Toxicology and Environmental Assessment. And my primary job thematically is to look at the human health side of potential toxic exposures in Los Angeles County. So this is an area where I have some expertise, and I also work for the California Poison Control System, where we hear about a lot of these cases of poisoning. These substances that have become known as bath salts have been trafficked on the internet for a number of years now, since approximately 2003, but it has only really gained a lot of attention in the past 1 or 2 years. And we've had a number of cases here in the United States where people are getting these substances rather readily, whether they be from shops, dealers, or perhaps over the internet. And they are being sold as under names such as bath salts or plant food. And these are simply diversionary tactics for the people who sell them in order to sell these actual illegal substances. They are derived from a plant that's called a cat plant, and that's spelled K-H-A-T. And the ingredients within that plant are called cathinones, and that's actually spelled with a C, C-A-T-H-I-N-O-N-E. And what happens here is that these substances are actually very, very similar to substances that we know well as illegal drugs, such as amphetamines and cocaine. And they are actually very structurally similar to amphetamines and can behave in the body like a number of different drugs, such as amphetamines, cocaine, even LSD. A number of these cases have resulted in severe injury. A few cases of death have been reported over the United States as well. Part of the difficulty is the availability of these substances, and with the availability over the Internet, that makes it extraordinarily easy for people from state to state to obtain these substances. And as a result, there are a number of different, let's call them street names for these substances. So I could give you a list and lists of perhaps 50 different names that people are selling these substances under, and as a result, they become very difficult to control. So I definitely agree with the push to try to ban the ingredients specifically in these substances, because that's where it begins.
And let me ask you, in your expert opinion, in reading this, it says here that the California Poison Control Center started receiving calls about exposure to bath salts with these ingredients, with the MDPV. The CPCC reports use of these have effects similar to those of cocaine and methamphetamines, including chest pains, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, extreme paranoia, and delusions, which and it further goes on to say the CPCC also reports that individuals under the influence of drugs found in these with these ingredients have experienced visually disturbing hallucinations that have incited them to violence and self-mutilation, suicide, and acute psychotic breaks that have led to permanent psychosis. This is pretty extreme. And this is, in your expert opinion, what you have found these ingredients to cause as well?
That's true.
And so, and is the county looking at similar bans, you know?
To my knowledge, I don't think we are. I know that there are there's some state legislation that is being looked at. I know federally that's being looked at as well. To my knowledge, the county's not looking at anything specific.
Okay, well, hopefully they'll take our lead in this as well, so people don't just walk across the street if they're on the edge of the city and buy it in some other city in the county and a state ban, because I've done some research on this as well, and if you type in these ingredients, it is all over the Internet, and it clearly states that other countries have banned this already. Other cities throughout the United States have already banned this. So I applaud this effort and think we should lead by example. Mr. Zine, do you have anything to add?
How's it ingested?
You can administer this stuff by virtually any method. It is sold usually in the form of some kind of a powder or a pulverized pill, and you can just simply ingest it in any liquid or ingest the pill itself. Some people actually crush it up and take it intravenously. Some people even take it rectally. You can really get it into your system by any method.
And you say it can be purchased over the Internet. So if it's purchased over the Internet, how do we ban sales over the Internet to the city of L.A.?
It's a good question.
We have the city attorney that question, because the retail store is one issue, but if you can purchase over the Internet, I mean, to me, it seems like it should be a federal law, not a
yes.
state law or a county, but a federal law, and I don't know if the federal...
Yes, Deputy City Attorney Brian Sotelo. Yes, Councilmember Zine. The DEA just recently issued an emergency order banning these substances, so that would address the fact if they were sold over the Internet. That order goes into effect in October.
So if we do something on a local ordinance, would that be superseded by what the DEA has done?
Well, it's not going to be preempted. The federal law specifically provides that the cities or states can enact similar type of legislation.
But we have a lot of laws that are federal laws that deal with throughout the country.
Right.
Why wouldn't they address this particular substance in that manner? If it's that bad of a toxic.
Well, they have, because this is an emergency legislation that was passed by the DEA. It's currently pending in Congress for a permanent ban.
All right.
So they went ahead and actually did issue the temporary ban, which is good for a year, and a 6-month increase the ban. It's being addressed right now on a federal level. But
Right. So this would then take effect in a couple months in the city of Los Angeles.
It should be,
take care of that, but still Culver City, Beverly Hills, Glendale, Burbank, and we don't have a county ordinance, then they'd still be able to dispense that product, or on the internet. So it seems like there's a lot of work to be done if we find that it's hazardous and we want to have an impact throughout the United States, because little pockets, I mean, it's not going to affect City of San Fernando, which is a neighboring city. It's going to affect City of LA. That's what I'm saying. It's
on a federal level, it will.
it will.
Yes. The
On
DEA.
on the internet.
On the internet, supposedly if it crosses state lines, it would affect. The DEA could enforce.
So the impact that we're going to have is what compared to what the federal law or the state law?
Well, we would also have it on a city level too. So, like for instance, at the head shops, if they're displaying or selling these products, the LAPD can come in and confiscate and
Okay. Are you from Narcotics?
Yes, Councilman. Bill Hart, Captain at Gang and Narcotics Division. This would benefit the LAPD in terms of being able to have all of our officers enforce a local ordinance rather than only our task force officers who are attached to the DEA and other agencies that would be able to enforce the federal ban, but that's not the bulk of LA police officers, as you know.
Right. Okay. No, I think it's necessary. I just wonder how long it's been around, and sometimes we're Johnny come lately to get it taken care of. And you mentioned, Doctor, that the county's not even looking at it,
Not yet.
the Board of Supervisors. So maybe we should send a recommendation forward, send a copy to the county to see if they can.
Well, I think LA should take the lead on this and set the example, and hopefully many other local cities, counties, and states will follow.
It sounds like some others.
Sounds like it's very, very serious. It's rampant. There are, from what we've heard from testimony in LAPD and experts, there are local vendors here throughout the city selling these substances, and it's getting out of control. And the side effects are much worse than a lot of the other issues we've had to deal with in previous years, like flu sniffing and others. These are pretty serious and quick to respond and react because of the chemicals particularly to young children. And if they're marketed in such a way that they should be ingested and they're sold cheap and they're accessible, we should put a ban on them right away. So I support this.
Hey, one more, did you say it's pending in the state legislature also?
not to my knowledge. I don't believe it's pending in state legislation. It is in federal level, in Congress it is.
Because it looks like a number of states around the country have already enacted legislation regarding this. And somehow we should send it to the county and also send it to the state to do it as quickly as possible, save as many lives as we can, because it's obviously, it's been around a while, and some of us haven't even heard about it until now.
So moved. We'll go ahead and do that, take those recommendations, and take the next item. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Item 3, motion Labange Garcetti requesting that the city attorney prepare an ordinance to require all tour buses with open rooftop seating to install a headphone-based system so that sound and audio cannot be heard by the residents.
Okay, do we have any report backs on item 3?
You have a speaker's card, sir.
No speaker cards
You do have one. You have one.
on 3?
Yeah.
Well, we do have one speaker card on 3. Yes. Mr. and Mrs. Abrahams? I can't read the first name. Mr. Abrahams.
Hi, I'm George Abrahams, Director of the Beechwood Canyon Neighborhood Association. We're in an area that's heavily impacted by tour bus operators. Some tour operators have been conciliatory and accommodating and adopted headphone systems. Others are hostile, exploitive, and very inconsiderate. Here's a letter that I received from one of our neighbors. I was just threatened by Peter Lagstaff of Star City Tours. He was blocking traffic on a narrow bend on Deronda by my address where there's already been 3 accidents in the last 6 months. I asked him to move so that the cars coming up the street and those coming down could move. He stopped his van, stared menacing at me, and began flipping me off. I yelled at him to move again, and he said he was blocking traffic. He stared, cussing at me. At the time, I approached the van, and he said, "Step away or I'll get out and beat you like a stepchild," in front of his passengers and other neighbors. He remained staring menacingly and threatening until the honking of other cars finally got him to move. For these operators, legislation is necessary to ensure compliance. It would relieve neighborhood noise and provide a superior experience for the passengers who could hear the dialogue without interference from ambient noise.
Thank you. We don't have a report on this item, but I do have a question perhaps the city attorney's office can answer, and it's really on the regulation of this and who would license it, like taxis. Would this go to the Taxi Commission, the Public Utilities Commission, who regulates vehicles? I'm trying to determine who would be the best. And I understand that in looking at the motion, that there are several cities, New York, San Francisco, Florida, that have similar types of restrictions and programs. So the next step, I think, would be to figure out, asking either for a report back or at least an ordinance, a draft ordinance on this, who would be the licensing body?
Who in the city or?
Who in the city?
Okay. I think it's Department of Transportation, but we'd have to look at it. I know that the Department of Transportation and the Board of Transportation Commissioners or something like that does regulate various types of vehicles that transport passengers in the city.
Okay. And I know there's somebody from CD4 is here if they want to step up and maybe perhaps they've done a little more research on this or have some ideas.
Good morning, council members. Lisa Schechter with Councilman Tom LaBonge's office. There's been, in the past year, Council District 4 along with Council District 13 has seen an increase in tour bus operators. And as they travel through the narrow streets of the Hollywood Hills, the residents have been impacted greatly by not only the traffic but also the amplification that comes from the tour buses because most of them are open-aired. So what we are proposing is that we draft an ordinance to require, or possibly a phase-in ordinance that we require open-air tour buses to have headsets. So that would eliminate the amplification as these tour bus operators drive through the residential streets.
When you suggest a phase-in rather than a time certain, what
Maybe
kind of phase-in?
like 18 months, 2 year, to try to get them to comply with the cost to put the headsets on. Now, there are some tour operators that already do that, like the hop-on, hop-off Starline tours already have headsets, but there are other operators that do not have headsets.
And you're just simply asking the ones that have the open-air ones that are
All open-air.
amplified, all open-air. Okay.
Not just double-decker, but there are some other ones that are like a van situation.
Disrupting residents, and I understand they have these in other cities.
Correct.
That they require them in other cities?
Interestingly enough, when we introduced this motion over 18 months ago, and it wasn't heard in this committee, however, other cities were calling us because they had seen the motion that we were trying to put in, and they've already acted on their ordinance. San Francisco called us, and Florida called us. But since then, Florida, San Francisco, I believe New York, have placed in an ordinance.
Great. Okay, well, let's go ahead and ask for a report back then on, it sounds like we need to see some actual phase-in language, how long you want to see this take effect, the outreach to the companies and letting them know that it's in effect, and what the regulations are. I'm not sure if tour buses, the open-air tour buses, have other regulations in the city, whether those are hours of operation in residential communities, or if you're looking for anything else, just the headset program?
It is my belief that the City of Los Angeles doesn't have an enforcement mechanism or any jurisdiction over tour buses other than LAPD code.
West Traffic utilizes the CVC as well as CHP. We in Hollywood have...
Your name, please?
Sharon Shapiro from Councilman LaBonge's office.
Thank you.
Have conducted a number of task forces with California Highway Patrol, Council District 13, Council District 4, Council District 5, the Office of Finance. We also have the support of the local Business Improvement District as well as the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. Essentially, it's the CVC for the state. CHP regulates as far as the safety mechanisms to ensure that all the vehicles are operating within their purview as far as brakes, turn signals, things of that sort. And then traffic divisions from LAPD work as far as the actual rules and regulations of the road.
Because we do have noise ordinances now for quiet comfort in residential communities, and we're going to have to make sure that we're also not superseding state law in that we have control over this. What happens if one of these vehicles boards in one city and tours through L.A., but they're licensed, they're state licensed, not city licensed. We don't issue permits for these tour buses. Do we in fact have the jurisdiction? So I think we need to research that as well and bring that back to committee with a report from both the CLA and the city attorney's office to ensure that we have authority and make that determination, and then also to work with your office and determine what kind of phase-in you want to do and what makes sense with these companies out there, because you had mentioned you don't want a financial hardship on them. You don't want to put it out there in 30 days and say they have to comply because they have to go out and purchase this equipment and do those things. And if there's an increase, it also tells us that there's an increase in tourism, which is a good thing, and we want to make sure that tourists have a good experience here and enjoy it as well. So I think it's a great idea from that perspective, but there's some wrinkles to report back on and iron out. And so I appreciate that. We'll go ahead and ask for that to come back 30 days, 45 days. What do you think is reasonable?
That would be great, 30 days.
30 days? Fantastic. So we'll ask if we can get those reports back and reschedule it in 30 days.
And one other thing, council member, we didn't want to overburden LAPD going up there citing for amplification while the tourists are on the bus.
Well, you know, if you put an LAPD officer, we have the nicest uniform and badge in the country, if not the world, onto a tour bus, the tourists would like it very much. I'm sure they would want to take photos. Of LAPD's officers are celebrities, and particularly with tourists from other countries, and they need to be celebrated. So that might not be a bad idea, but and then we can generate more revenue for the city.
We would definitely welcome that if they were willing to go on the bus.
We're willing to go on the
Yeah.
bus.
On
All
the
right.
tour.
We'll report back in 30 days on this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, next item.
Item 4, communication from the mayor and seal report relative to the United States Department of Homeland Security fiscal year 2010 Regional Catastrophic Planning Department Program Grant Award in the amount of $3,570,000 for the period August 1st, 2010 through April 30, 2013.
Morning.
Ed Rose with the CAO's office. The report before you is a grant acceptance for the fiscal year 10 Regional Catastrophic Preparedness Grant Program. Of the total of $3.5 million that was awarded to the LA Long Beach Riverside urban area jurisdictions, approximately $1.9 million is dedicated to the city of LA, which will fund 14 positions in various city departments, including the Emergency Management Department, which has 8 positions, the LAFD, which has 2 positions, LAPD, 1 position, and the Housing Department with 3 positions. The thrust of the grant program is focused on 2 investment justification areas. The first is the Regional Recovery Planning Guide, and the second is a Regional Disaster Housing Planning program. The grant funds the direct salary costs and related expenses for the positions in the city departments, and the fringe benefits are already budgeted, so there's no fiscal impact to the city. And I'm joined here at the table by representatives from various departments.
My only questions really relate to the city match, really go into the need for the fiscal questions on the match, the long-term effects of what happens when the grant expires and we still have that personnel in those positions, which happens often. So I'd like to do this. The merit of the item is what I'd like to discuss instead of the positions. I'd like to defer this also to the Budget Committee from that perspective to get those questions asked and answered in Budget and Finance, which I'm also on. But I think that's more appropriate because there's some potential long-term costs to to the city in these positions, and I think far too often we approve these grant programs, and then after they've expired, we have these positions lingering, and then they want to be regularized after so many years. And not that catastrophic preparedness is something that we should take lightly, and it's critical. And that's what I'd like to spend the time of this committee, if you can explain exactly what we'll be doing regionally with the grant money, specifically in the program, and then I'd like to defer the other questions to the Budget and Finance Committee.
Anna Burton with the city's Emergency Management Department. This is the third year of programmatic funding specific to regional catastrophic planning. The first was a combination of 07 and 08 federal year monies. We initially started off with a mass evacuation plan, which has been complete. What the plan, or the guide, excuse me. So we completed a regional mass evacuation guide and an associated template that then cities can specifically use to develop their own city-specific plan. The city, in fact, just completed its own mass evacuation plan, which will be coming forward to the mayor and council shortly. Subsequent to that, they did a mass care and shelter guide and a plan, and the city, too, is using that to develop its own mass care and shelter plan. The third was mass reception. So we are now through the Critical Planning and Training Alliance, referred to as the Alliance, which is a group of individuals from not only the city and the county, but from 5 adjacent counties. So we include Ventura, San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange, and Los Angeles County to develop these regional guides to ensure consistency across the Southern California area. Once we complete now the evacuation, mass care, and shelter reception, this program will now implement a catastrophic recovery plan and guide, which not only the city, but all 88 cities within the county, and then we will share it with the 5 regional counties and all the cities within those counties. Coincidentally, released this week was the new National Disaster Recovery Framework, similar to the disaster response framework. So we will be using federal guidance to really drive how we use and develop recovery plans for the area.
Terrific. No, thank you. And you said those were going to be coming, those plans will be presented shortly to council.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Do you have a time frame on when those might?
Probably within the next 90 days.
Oh, great. Excellent. Okay, thank you. We are joined by Councilman Paul Corian. Good morning. Morning. Thank you. And do you have any comments, questions, concerns? My concerns, just so you know, before you walked in the room, if you were listening in as well, but I'll reiterate it. My concerns over the long-term impact, structural impact on the city budget, where we approve positions that are grant funded, either with or without a match, and this has I believe, a 25% match.
Yes.
And plus fringe benefits as well, that oftentimes we'll accept these, and years later the grant or program runs out and nobody's tracking that. We still have all these bodies in those positions. I'd like to defer this to the Budget and Finance Committee because there is a direct fiscal impact, also perhaps a structural one. So I'd like to defer that portion of those questions to the Budget and Finance Committee, which I think is appropriate. And deal with the actual programmatic aspects of the grant in this committee. And I'd like to move the CAO report in this committee and accept this as well. I think it's critically important to have the catastrophic preparedness programs in place regionally, and want to bring them up to speed. So those are the conversations we've had. If you have any questions or concerns, Mr. Zine? That's fine. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move the item and send it to Budget and Finance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 7, motion Parks Perry relative to consideration of Hawaii's Opportunity Probation with Enforcement HOPE program and the possibility of instituting similar programs by the city and county of Los Angeles.
And we don't have any speaker cards on this, but we do have a speaker.
Good morning. My name is Angela Hawke, and I'm a professor of economics and policy analysis at Pepperdine University. I led the cost-benefit analysis of California's Proposition 36 and was the principal investigator of Hawaii's HOPE program. It's Hawaii's honest opportunity probation with enforcement. California and Los Angeles, too, are in need of approaches to manage offenders in our community safely, many of whom have drug problems. We've tried many ways of dealing with this population before, most of these haven't worked very well, including Proposition 36. Proposition 36 started off with great promise. I was one of the evaluators who announced good news 2 years into the program, saying we were diverting people from our prisons, and people were managing to get into treatment who hadn't had that opportunity before. But very soon the good news dried up. Our offenders learned that they could get away with monkey business, and they did, and that there was no consequence for violating under the law. The most common response when we interviewed Proposition 36 probationers of what happens when you don't do what you're told to do was nothing. There simply wasn't any consequences attached. A much smarter approach to managing our drug-involved offenders, many of whom go on to commit non-drug crimes, and this is a population that often grows up, was drug courts. Now, drug courts have a happier ending than Proposition 36 in that they tend to show relatively good results, but there aren't a solution for California. We have big problems here, and drug courts operate at a small scale. A typical drug court in this country runs between 50 and 75 offenders. That's assigned to one court. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of people who need supervision. We'd simply shut down our criminal justice system if we had a strategy of putting everybody into drug courts. The other issue with drug courts, some really good research out of the University of Chicago and University of Maryland shows that they don't divert from prison at all because the people who make it into the program were never prison bound to begin with. They're dealing with very small fish. We need programs that can target big fish at low cost so we can actually make a dent in the drug use problem. A new approach that has emerged that's getting a lot of attention from around the country now, and I think we should observe this program cautiously from the city of Los Angeles perspective, is a program called Hawaii's HOPE. It started with a frustrated judge who was new to the bench, and people would come before him with long histories of violations, 16 positive tests for methamphetamine. And the probation officer would bring him before the court and say, I'd like to revoke him and send him to prison. And in Hawaii, they had really long underlying terms, 10, 15, 20 years sometimes, is what the person was facing. And so the judge observed this real catch-22 that the probation departments were facing. They had too little or too much, and those were the only levers that they could pull, and we have something very similar here. The too little is when someone tests positive, all a probation officer can do is talk to the person, cajole the person, encourage them to do better, because the alternative is a revocation, which is too much. And often probation officers say, I'm not going to write this guy up for a revocation just for a THC positive or a methamphetamine positive. I really want this person to go to prison for a single episode of drug use. So what would happen is that they would accumulate long lists of violations. So the message sent to the probation in the court that day is that somehow the first 16 positive drug tests were okay, but number 17 is making us mad enough that we're going to send you to prison. That's a very, very bad strategy for managing human behavior change. And so the judge said, okay, well, let's figure this out. And he did something that's very unusual for a judge. He got his court staff to scour through academic literature on behavior change. How do we make people do what we want them to do in a way that we can afford to do it? And I came up with a program called Honest Opportunity Probation with Enforcement, where what the law, what the court says to you and what the probation officer says to you is actually what happens. Now, many of us in the room might think that's what happens, and actually, looking at the suits, no, you know better than that. We tell probationers or parolees what's going to happen to them, and then what we do is completely divergent from what we say. We say, this is your list of conditions. If you don't comply, something horrible is going to happen to you. We hardly ever monitor those violations. When the violations do happen, we infrequently act on them, and when we do act on them, we're lucky if it's 2 months from now. A drug user has a lot of patience to wait for a sanction 2 months from now. He'd rather take his chances, especially given the probability of detection here is so low to begin with, which is why we see continued drug use. So in Hawaii, the program is a swift and certain sanctions model. Every violation that the court tells you will be monitored is monitored, and any violation of those conditions is acted on. And it's acted on quickly. You are arrested immediately, not 2 months from now. You're sentenced to jail for 2 days immediately, not 2 months from now. And tying the behavior to the consequence really resonates, especially for a drug-using population. My favorite comment from our research in Hawaii was from a methamphetamine user who said, "When I used last night, I knew I was going to test positive today, and it simply ruined the high." That's what we need to do here. We need to find ways of ruining the high. We don't ruin the high when we're acting 2 months from now. The arrests are immediate. How it works is that it starts in an open court with a judge issuing what's called a warning hearing. And during the warning hearing, the judge says, "I know you've been on probation before, or on parole before, depending on the population. And I know we've said a lot to you, and we haven't really acted. This is a new era. From now on, what I tell you in court today is actually going to happen, so best you get in line with the following conditions." They're tested 6 times a month for the first 2 months. If they test negative, they are stepped down to less frequent monitoring. And any one of those drug tests turn up dirty, they are immediately arrested and incarcerated, typically for 2 to 3 days for a first violation. Where Hawaii differs completely from what we do here, which I think is a genius approach to resource allocation, is that not everybody who is arrested on a drug charge is considered an addict. Do I need to hurry up?
I'm just going to ask that you start
Sure.
wrapping it up if you could, so we can ask some questions. And
Sure. They only use their treatment resources on people who can't desist from drug use on their own or who request it, which turns out to be about 15% of the population. Here we treat everybody as if they're addicts. And if you move your resources around, that really works. This was a high-risk population. We target the most serious offenders in hope. Many of them have long histories of violence, property crimes. All of them are drug-involved. Huge reductions in arrests, huge reductions in incarceration. In spite of this being an immediate jail sanction, if you get the behavior under control, they don't end up in jail and prison. Now there are 12 states across the country implementing similar programs, all of whom, as far as we know, have very similar results. This isn't a Hawaii phenomenon.
Right. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And thanks for the report. Thanks for sticking your neck out and having to travel to Hawaii to go research this as well.
Yeah.
I know that's very difficult. And when you hear Hawaii and hope, I was thinking maybe this is a presidential, another campaign, but this is actually looking into this. This is great, and this is a great program, and it sounds like it's been successful. I haven't seen what the success rates there have been, but based on at least the motion and some of the studies, it sounds like it's got some merit. However, with the City of Los Angeles, we don't have the jurisdiction with probation and parole. The county and the state would handle those. I also don't know what Hawaii's prison population is. In the state of California, they're actually talking about massive releases, and they're doing that as we speak. And so those are concerns that would impact how something like that would operate here.
Right.
However, I think the point that when you send down a truth in sentencing, when you tell somebody they're going to get certain sanctions, if you will, against them if they violate probation or parole, particularly drug addicts. And I believe we should try to stick to those. There's a tremendous cost as well, and so there's a balance that has to be struck. But the idea that you would call in a phone number and it would tell you almost like jury duty if you're going to get tested that day or that month is fascinating. And I think we should ask the state to look into something like this, a program like this.
There is one in California already.
That you call in and it's done at random?
It's for parolees. It's high-risk parolees in Seattle, in Sacramento.
For high-risk parolees, right. But not what you were referring to with what they're doing in Hawaii. So, any of my colleagues have any comments or questions? So we'll go ahead and receive.
Just very quickly, California has the most expensive penal system in the country, and we have the worst, literally the worst recidivism rate in the country. And the reason for that is because of parolees who violate parole predominantly. It's not so much because of new offenders committing new crimes, it's because of returning parolees who are put back into the system. And it's bankrupting this state. And if we don't get a handle on drug abuse in our prison system and have real rehabilitation in our prison system and getting people off of drugs, the state is going to continue to go bankrupt. And so it's important that we look at these sorts of innovative approaches. I agree with the chair. It's something that I hope that the county and the state will be looking at, but I appreciate having the report and the opportunity to consider this.
Well, appreciate you coming down and sharing this as well. So we'll go ahead and receive and file this report and move on to the next item, please.
Item 8, Board of Police Commissioners reports relative to the selection of Absolute Towing, Hollenbeck Division Incorporated, to serve as the official police garage, providing standard duty towing and storage services for the Hollenbeck area.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Council members. Richard T. Fank, Executive Director of the Board of Police Commissioners. I'm joined by Lieutenant Chris Waters, the Commanding Officer of Commission Investigation Division, who is the overseer of the OPG contracts, and Detective 3 Ben Jones, who is the OPG Garage Administrator for the Police Commission and CID. With that, before you is a recommendation from the Board of Police Commissioners that was prepared by myself and approved by the Board and forwarded to you, that the official police garage service area 4 for the Hollenbeck area be awarded to Absolute Tow Company. We received 11 responses to the RFP that was submitted out. Of those 11, 9 were evaluated. 1 was withdrawn and 1 was disqualified. Of the 9 that were evaluated, it was the recommendation of the evaluation committee that Absolute Tow be given that contract. I'd like to talk a little bit about the process of the evaluation and how that took place. There was, within the office of the Board of Police Commissioners, we segregated the process. The RFP was developed and reviewed by the city attorney, reviewed by the city council, and was released. Upon the release of the RFP, there was assignments that I gave within our office. Detective Jones, with his subject matter expertise, was assigned to do the background investigation of all the submittals of RFPs. He had no involvement in the evaluation. He made no recommendation to the evaluation committee. It was a clear investigation and an analysis of the response of the RFP based on the requirements of the RFP. Then we prepared an evaluation committee that was comprised of a representative of the CAO's office, a representative of the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation is about 50% of the tows that an OPG does on an annual basis. So we felt DOT should be involved in the evaluation. And the third was a member of my immediate policy staff, a senior management analyst too. They received the recommendations that were completed by Detective Jones and his staff, not recommendations, the investigations that were completed. They came to them. They then did their independent evaluation, absent any analysis of the quality or lack thereof of the individual operator. To the degree that when Detective Jones would contact individuals who were listed as references on the RFP responses, the references were contacted. They were advised they were going to be tape recorded. All of their contact was tape recorded, transcribed, and submitted to the committee. There was no evaluation, recommendation, or opinion based in that information Detective Jones gave to the committee. It was all fact-based on what witnesses.
Is that something we've done in every case? Have we done that since the beginning of time, where we actually call and tape the interviews and then have those transcribed and submitted?
For the OPG process, I would ask Detective Jones that.
No, we did that this time based on our previous experience.
It is just to make sure.
That's impressive. I've never heard that the cities actually, when they verify and they call independent third-party cities, whoever that might be, to get an evaluation, that they actually tape record it, transcribe it, and submit it as part of the record. That's fascinating. I've never heard that we do.
The reason we did that, sir, is because there becomes a point that one could say that the investigators who did the background, they favored a company, they embellished a report.
Exactly. I mean, that's why I wanted to point that out, but I didn't realize.
The exact transcript of what the interviewer said.
Brilliant.
With no opinion. There was no, this is what they said, the questions were asked, and this was their response. So the evaluation committee had all of that information.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
That's a key point. I just want to make sure that the committee understands that we tried to be as impartial as we could be in doing this process. The evaluation committee completed their work. At that point in time, they prepared and sent to me a recommendation. The process, it's important to understand that Detective Jones's work and that of his staff was their work and their work only. They had no input into the evaluation process. They gave them their work product. I had no influence on the evaluation committee. I did not speak with the evaluation committee. I saw nothing of the evaluation committee until they completed their work. The purpose of this is so that we would have an integrity in the process, that one could not say someone influenced the process along the way, either Detective Jones and his staff or myself. And that was critical because one of the respondents was an incumbent. And so we did not want anyone to have the perception that the incumbent was treated in a different way than any other applicant for the RFP as a part of the process being impartial. With that said, the recommendation was made for absolute tow. At the Board of Police Commissioners, we had two individuals who came forward from companies that were not selected, and they spoke against that award. At that point, we were advised that there was a request for formal appeal hearings. The RFP did outline a process for an appeal hearing. One of the things that we had to do then is we reached out through the city attorney's office and other entities within the city to identify what's the city formal appeal process for an RFP. We discovered, I will say much to my amazement, in the city of Los Angeles there is not a standard appeal process for response to a request for proposal. Each entity, each department makes it up on their own. That became difficult for us because, again, we wanted to create a process that we felt was fair, gave the appellant an opportunity, but also was something that we could deal with. With that said, we worked with the city attorney's office. We drafted recommendations. There were back and forth communications with the city attorney's office. We came up with an appeal process. We notified the appellants. We scheduled those interviews and appeal hearings at their convenience. And from that, there was nothing that was presented to the appeal panel, of which they were composed of three individuals, one from the police department who was assigned to the training division, one who was assigned to the information technology division, and one from the fire department. We selected them based on their experience in dealing with contracts in the past. Their recommendation was that there was nothing that was inappropriate in the award of the contract to Absolute, and with that went to the Board of Police Commissioners, and the Board of Police Commissioners sustained the recommendation for the contract award to Absolute Tow. That's how we are here today. If you have any specific questions as to process, anything else, we'll be happy to respond to those, and with that, we'll submit to your questions.
Thank you. I do. First, it seems to me that that this process could favor incumbents. And so if we've got an incumbent that has the experience, if you will, or even their lack thereof, but if they're an incumbent, are they judged by their track record with the city in terms of if they have complaints? Is that even part of the RFP? Because if we had 11 respondents to this RFP.
Right.
9 is what actually came out of the process after you disqualified some, and 1 was the incumbent. And it sounds like you truly were impartial and siloed off pieces to independent, unbiased third parties to conduct the research, and it was expensive from what the report says and what you presented. But with the incumbent, if it was part of the RFP or not, I didn't see that in here. If they got complaints and it's not held against them to make an even playing field, because obviously the other 9 or 8 in this case would have no complaints because they weren't an incumbent. Did you use those complaints? Was that part of the point system in this?
Yes, sir. The way that process worked is each individual respondent gave references, and that included the incumbent. And we also knew the incumbent because they had done work for us for 10 years.
So for 10 years, how many total tows, if you will, did they have?
They would average, I would say, 20,000 a year, so 200,000 tows. The incumbent, just for the record, had 2 sustained complaints in that period of 10 years. 2 sustained complaints.
In 10 years?
10 years. One for a 21-minute delay on a response to a tow. That was an internal LAPD complaint. The second on a
21-minute delay.
The response time is to be 20 minutes.
Right.
They arrived in 41 minutes. A complaint was generated by the area where this delay took place. Formal complaint. It comes to the...
So they had 1 verified complaint out of I'm sorry, not 20,000 tows, 200,000 tows for being late once in LA traffic.
That's correct.
What was the other one?
That's incredible.
The other one was for a lien processing sale paperwork issue. It was a paperwork issue. Both of those were sustained complaints. The contractor was admonished as to those, office counseling, as we always do, and we felt that is appropriate based on the volume of work that they do and the incident. There also was another incident that I think we evaluated, and it is important to note that the current contractor had an internal theft that occurred in, I think, 2004. Internal theft was discovered with the termination of one of the assistant managers. It was an internal theft of approximately $125,000.
This is, cash, not a car.
Cash.
Cash.
And it was done by this assistant general manager through manipulation of collection of data, changing of records, etc. It was discovered when this manager left by the operator. The operator self-reported himself to Detective Jones. Upon us learning of that, we then requested the Office of Finance and the Controller's Office to conduct an audit of the operator. The audit was completed by the Office of Finance and Controller, and it was determined that the amount of money which the operator said he lost was verified by both those offices. The amount of money that the city lost out of that, because he had his own loss from his towing and storage rates that he would basically keep himself. The city lost the 7% gross revenue fee of those profits, the vehicle release fee, any lien processing fees, and any parking tax. That fee was identified, and the contractor paid the city those funds in total.
Did the operator get the money back? Would he receive the money from the former employee?
No, it was a theft. It was an internal theft.
So it wasn't insured. So he still paid the city?
He paid the city the funds the city were due. And we have a letter from the Controller's Office that identified, we have the paper trail of his self-reporting, our forwarding to the Office of the Finance Director and the Controller to request an audit, and a response from the Controller.
This didn't come out of an audit. He self-reported it.
Self-reported it, sir.
And asked for the audit.
Right. Exactly right.
The audit verified the same amounts. And then did we bill this operator, or did he submit these funds on his own?
He submitted the funds on his own based on the completion of the audit by the Office of the Controller. So, again, as you say, incumbency matters. Incumbency does matter. It matters if you do good, and it matters if you don't do well. Same as in the political process. So there is a benefit to being an incumbent.
I wouldn't compare this to the political process.
Incumbency, I would, sir, but not this.
We have more than 2 complaints out of 200,000 tries.
But I would also like to say, again, to clarify on incumbency, prior to absolute tow, 12 years ago when the RFP went out for selection, the incumbent at that time was not renewed, and absolute tow was given the contract.
That was my next question, is how many of these, and that's why I asked if it favors incumbents or not. I understand that, and you just made a statement to the contrary, which is the question I was going to ask, but I've been told that the city has never given an award to a bidder in an RFP process that wasn't an incumbent.
That's not correct.
That's not correct.
That's false. That's not correct. It has happened also in 2003. The 77th area tow was done for years by Kaiser Tow. At that time, the RFP went out, and the recommendation was to award to Alice Tow. After a significant amount of debate, Alice Tow received the contract in 2004. So there have been
I'm still struck on something. 200,000 tows and only 2 complaints.
That's correct, sir.
Is that typical? I mean,
I would defer to Detective Jones.
That doesn't sound...
We track all the complaints.
That's incredible.
And the OPGs don't generate a lot of complaints, but there are some that are better than others. And this particular operator does not generate a lot of complaints.
Is this one of the best operators? Because, just on that particular issue.
Because we're going to be evaluating all of them, right. I don't want to rank him in amongst it, but he is in the top tier.
2 complaints out of 200,000 is incredibly low number. And
as to the other 8 respondents that we investigated, the other 8 gave references of cities that they towed for. So they did not have a track record as an OPG.
Right.
But they had a track record as a service provider to another municipality or county.
Were all 8, did we do those type of investigations that were recorded and documented with all 8?
Yes. Yes, sir. So if a company gave ABC Police Department as a provider, ABC Police Department was contacted. The individual within that department who was the responsible for liaisoning with their tow service was contacted by Detective Jones or one of his investigators. we're doing this background investigation on an RFP submitted by such and such tow company. We're going to transcribe. We'd like to put you on tape and get the interview.
So you stated earlier, too, that the city in general, which this opens up a whole nother line of questioning, just not to this panel, not on this issue, but that the city in general doesn't have a specific process for appeals. And you had to design one for this, which would be unbiased, independent, comprised of individuals that were not party to either the RFP or the process. Are you confident? Is there anything in that appeal process that you would change, that you would go back and say we should have done this differently, or is this a model that we might look at for not only are there RFPs with the department, but with other departments as well?
I couldn't speak to it being a model for other departments. It worked for us, but it was interesting. As I said, I asked our program manager for this project to reach out and get what the appeal process was for the city. And I was amazed to find out that there's not a uniform appeal process. So with that, we contacted LAPD, found out within the contract section of LAPD how they do it, reached out to the fire department because we knew they had appeal processes for brush clearance, et cetera. Contacted other entities within the city that do contracts, and there was no uniform process. So from that, we developed a process in concert with the city attorney, which we felt was an independent process that would give us a fair evaluation of the process to ensure that what we did was appropriate and fair.
And you actually brought in somebody from the city attorney's office, from the fire department, and worked with them?
We worked with the city attorney's office to develop the RFP process, and it was ultimately approved by the office of the city attorney.
Okay, those are all the questions I have.
That's all?
Alex? Oh, thank you.
I mean, it's only been 20 minutes of quizzing the police department, a great job they do. You mentioned sustained complaints. Were there any not sustained complaints?
Sure, of course there are.
So they had no foundation?
There's no foundation for those complaints.
Okay, and the internal theft that took place, the dollars that the city received because of the owner, how much was that?
$25,000.
Okay.
I have the exact number if you need it.
Just under the ballpark on that. You mentioned DOT, investigated the service of DOT. Did you investigate it with the police department personnel, the officers, the traffic divisions that call for OPG? Was there any communication with the personnel in the field that put the call in, we need OPG to at this location?
Well,
Is there any connection with that on your investigation?
Sure. And we talked to the auto coordinators and DOT coordinators for those particular areas, but as part of my regular assignment, I am the central point for complaints that come in regarding the OPGs, and our unit investigates all of those complaints. So we have the repository of all complaints from those. Even DOT, when they make a complaint, we investigate the complaint.
I'm talking about the officer in the field, the officer who is on patrol, or the motor cop that requests OPG tow, that would be absolute tow. Did you talk to any of those officers, the field officers?
I didn't go talk to any officers directly. I talked to the supervisors and the auto coordinators that respond to those things and handle the investigations regarding the OPGs. One of the things that are in our unit, when we go out, we do the inspections, we go out and we interview the officers, we do the follow-ups, but most of the complaints that are, if they're generated against an OPG, are generated by an officer in the field. Like the one sustained complaint was generated by an officer, we will go interview that officer, and he's the witness in the particular case.
Okay, just in the future, because I know we've all worked in the field, and oftentimes, request a unit or request whatever. And I remember Mr. T-Fank mentioned Kaiser. When I worked 77, we'd have extensive delays, and obviously that played a part in that, which was, I think, in 03. But just in the future, when you do an investigation, when you're interviewing people, it might be advantageous to go to a roll call and just, you folks happy with this service? Are they doing good? Because those are the mainline officers that deal with it on an everyday. The same thing with the traffic officers, the motor cops, I should say.
And we do that.
Okay.
And what I'm just trying to be as transparent as possible. as part of our regular assignment, we have a audit inspection team. When we go out to the areas, we monitor those things, and we talk to the officers in the area regarding those particular things. We talk to the detectives in the bureau, and we do that. There are cases where we have to go out and resolve those types of issues, but I wouldn't say in relationship specifically to that we go out and line up Olympic officers and interview them for this process. That's what I'm saying.
But on a routine basis, citywide, we have all these OPGs. So on a routine basis, you'd go to different divisions, talk to all the coordinators. So there's a relationship. It's like you're not down in the ivory tower and they're out there.
No, I'm on the, I'm on.
The tenant wants that done, right?
No,
Yes, we do.
If I could just expand on that, sir, what we have implemented in the past year is on a random basis, every OPG is audited. We will go into an OPG and we will say we want to see all of the records of vehicles that were in and out of here on the 30th of September. We will take all those records, we will compare those to the automated database system that we have access to. We'll compare those to the payments that were made to the city. So we do that on every OPG on a monthly basis. There's randoms audits that we have a team that goes out and does that. As a part of a controller's audit that was done in 2005, 2006?
2008.
2008, I'm sorry. The controller's audit identified that as the contract administrator, Commission Investigation Division has the responsibility to oversee the financial audits of OPGs. That had never been a responsibility before. Matter of fact, we could never get that information prior to that audit coming out. When that audit came out, we accepted that responsibility, even though we had not had that to us before. The first piece that I asked for, I wanted a status report of all of the accounts of the 18 contractors and their status of payment to the city to ensure that they were current. After a degree of delay, the information was not provided. I went back to the controller and said, I need to have you help us get this information from the Office of Finance. Ultimately, we were advised by the Office of Finance there must be some misunderstanding. We were provided that information and discovered that there are 2 OPGs, not this operator, that were delinquent in paying their 7% gross revenue fee, their vehicle license fee, and other fees to the tune of a total of about $1.4 million between the 2 operators. Upon finding that, we scheduled meetings with those 2 operators, had learned from the Office of Finance that they were attempting to work with them to get payment. That had not worked. We had never been notified. Within 30 days of having the office meeting, both operators were paid in full to the city. One was as a result of an internal theft. They requested that their fees and penalties be waived. They sent a letter through the Board of Police Commissioners that went to the city. City Council approved the waiver of those penalties and fees based on the internal theft. The other operator paid the penalties and fees and is current. So since we've taken...
Where are we on the audit in terms of percentage completion?
It's 100% complete and has been for several years. One of the other issues that came in that audit was that of the 18 contractors, 14 of them were not remitting the 7% gross revenue fee on vehicles that were lien processed. They believed they had not had to do that. Past audits conducted by the Office of Finance never identified that issue. The controller did identify it. With that, the OPG Association took exception to that and did not believe that they should have to pay the 7% gross revenue fee on those vehicles sold at lien processing. We asked the city attorney for an opinion, ultimately received an opinion that, yes, they are responsible for that, advised the OPG of that. We said we wanted an audit completed of all vehicles that were lien sold within the 4-year window of time that we could go back. We received that information. We audited and reviewed that information. We identified that between the 14, approximately $850,000 was owed the city in those 7% gross revenue fees. We took a report to the Board of Police Commissioners. We asked the board, because the fact that there was no intent to defraud the city, they were operating in good faith, they had had audits that had not caught this before, that we give them a period of a year within the fiscal year to get those payments made to the city. They can make one payment or make one payment a quarter. By middle of the fiscal year, all but about 3 or 4 of the garages had paid in total. By the end of the fiscal year, all the money was captured by the city.
Was this particular, did this RFP or this incumbent, let's keep it on this RFP. Did this incumbent, were they part of that failure to pay in that audit?
Just a second, I can tell you. Ben, do you recall off the top of your head? No. We have the report. If you give me just a second, we can pull that report.
Okay. That's what right. That's why I asked the question. So, well, you said, well, let me ask you this. Instead of pulling that document out right now, you said we're in 100% compliance.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so all those issues, whatever there have been resolved.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we have to keep it on this operator only and on this RFP. So the last,
I wasn't done.
well, you got anything more?
Yeah.
Well, let's keep it specific to this operator then, because it was steered into
I'm trying.
what else happened with
So the recommendation from your investigation, the recommendation from the commission is to continue with the current provider.
That was the selection committee's recommendation to the police commission, the police commission's recommendation to the council.
And that contract is for how many years?
5 years.
Okay. And that recommendation coming from this committee, and obviously with your research and with the commission recommendation, and I'm sure the protest has been heard, and after it's all been said and done, the decision by the department is to stay with the current absolute tow.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
anything further?
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, you covered the issues that I had very well, and Mr. Zine's questions as well. The one thing is there was kind of an underlying presumption in a lot of your questions about the advantages of incumbency in this. And as I'm looking at the RFP, it's not, the advantage of incumbency is not really leaping out at me. In fact, there are specific instructions to the review committee to instruct, they were instructed that they must weigh all facets of the service the city requires. They were instructed that their responsibility was to grade proposals from any proposers without OPG experience on their related experience, strength of assets, and related abilities, which made them competitive with an experienced OPG contract vendor. I'm really not seeing that there's any imbalance in the advantages of incumbent versus non-incumbent, other than those issues that are inherent to whether you have experience or not experience that will allow you to perform the services the city needs. So I think given the extensive review process, the anonymous review committee, the thorough investigation that was done, I feel very comfortable with this recommendation, although after hearing public comment on it, I may have some further follow-up questions.
Thank you for that. It sounds to me, from what I've read and the questions and the statements that have been presented, that you very well could have a disadvantage, quite frankly, to being an incumbent. That if you have a bad track record at all, that will be used against you, where current bidders won't have that in the city. And then you've gone out of your way not only to investigate those other bidders, but you recorded those conversations and transcribed them, which, quite frankly, and I said it earlier, is unheard of. And that's a great process. I think it's foolproof. So thank you for that. My only other last two comments were this, and I didn't see this in the RFP, and I don't know why. One is the parking tickets. Why aren't OPGs, why wasn't it part of the RFP to collect the parking tickets? I think, do we have another vendor in the city that's doing that?
The OPGs do collect parking tickets. The parking ticket collection is under a contract with the Department of Transportation. Right now, under the scofflaw
That's the ACS program?
Yes, under the scofflaw program. But what happens is when we impound vehicles, LAPD, DOT, the automated database uploads that information every night, and they get a report back, and it automatically places a scofflaw hold on the vehicles. And before those vehicles are released, they need to go to DOT to pay those tickets off before we release the car.
I'm sorry. So
we don't. The only aspect we don't have yet is where they actually can pay at the OPG to.
So they go pick up their vehicle. They may not know they have a parker or two or three. Well, if it's 5, right, we don't release the vehicle at 5, right? Under law. But anything up before 5, so they go pick up their vehicle and they can't pay at the window for their parking tickets. They have to leave there, go somewhere else, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
Why? Why can't they pay?
Chair, maybe we need to go, we're going to be late for council. Maybe we do.
We'll go quickly. Well, then, I think we need to ask, go ahead and approve this, send it on to council, and ask DOT to report back on allowing OPGs to collect the parking tickets when they pick up the vehicle. That's a no-brainer to me. Okay. Next item. Oh, no, I'm sorry, we have one card on this. This is from Victor Franco. Come on.
Morning, members of the committee. My name is Victor Franco Jr. I'm with Econet representing Tip Top Toe, which was one of the bidders, actually second place for the second time in this process. Let me be clear from the outset. We are not targeting this particular operator. We are not calling at all into question the research or the background checks of the police department nor of CID. We are clearly focused on the absolute process, forgive the pun, absolute process of the way the RFP is scored. And you touched on it a little bit on your comments in terms of the performance of an OPG operator or an incumbent. This is where the scoring then becomes a little bit subjective and not necessarily based on hard fact. And when you have an operator, an OPG operator, an incumbent, who is he's operating there, you mentioned 20,000 tows in a year, and then you compare that with other operators, and they both have outstanding clean records, but yet when one incumbent or the incumbent gets the higher score, say a 5, and then everybody else 3.5, 2.0, the question lies is where did we go south? And so it comes from, and this is just speculation, but partly becomes because the city knows that operator. The city doesn't know about operators in Santa Monica or in Orange County or in other jurisdictions, or if they tow for the FBI. They don't see those, they don't have the ability to go to a roll call in Santa Monica or talk to the FBI and say, hey, how is your OPG working out for you? And while there are background checks, I think the concern would be the subjective scoring process. It's not necessarily, and the questions that you ask. So it's not performance, but when you compare apples to apples, it's that scoring. And so we would ask that moving forward, you're going to see 18 of these in the next 2 years, but that's something you look at in terms of a scoring process. But we don't fault LAPD at all. We're not looking at the operator in this. It's just more about the process.
Let me just make one comment on that. It's that it sounds to me that they didn't just do background checks. They did performance audits that were recorded, that were transcribed. I hadn't heard that process before until now. I've never heard, in fact, that done in the city of LA on any RFP. And so moving forward, I'd like to request that the committee continue doing those. It sounds like it wasn't biased, it was independent in moving forward. I think if there are all these other RFPs coming out in the future, if one of your, if you're representing one of these bidders and one of these bidders happens to get it, don't bring that argument back when they're rebidding and they're an incumbent. But there is some advantage into knowing who you're dealing with. So we'll go ahead and move the item. Thank you very much. Before we lose a quorum, we'll go ahead and move the other items that we had on.
That completes your agenda.
Consent? Yes, but just to wrap up the consent items.
To add Mr. Kokor's design?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
That concludes the Public Safety Committee. We did public comment, right? Yeah.